Okay, as society pushes for a zero-emission method of transportation, people from around the world seek to replace all gasoline and diesel fuel vehicles for electric ones, especially here in the US, attempting to reduce the overall effects of climate change due to greenhouse gases. However, there are several limiting factors that would cause a sudden transition from utilizing gasoline fueled vehicles to electric powered ones that would actually invoke more pollution into the atmosphere. Specifically, I'll be addressing the polluting factors of a current method of producing electricity here in the United States. In addition, there is a rising demand for electricity here in the United States, and thus, if we were to transition from utilizing gasoline fueled vehicles to electric ones, our current power grid will be overwhelmed by the additional demand for electricity. See, I'm credible to speak upon this topic because all of our sources is available to everyone who has access to the internet, and these justifications are backed by government and scholarly administrations such as the Energy Information Administration. So what should we do as individuals? Well, we should hold on to our gasoline fueled vehicles, as this would decrease the demand for electricity, as well as also decrease the amount of pollution here in decrease the amount of global emissions, and I'll be explaining why. Well, coal-fired power plants produce 950 million metric tons of CO2 during 2020, while natural gas power plants produce 560 million metric tons. Fortunately, petroleum only produced 16 million metric tons of CO2. However, if we were to replace all of our coal-fired power plants for petroleum ones, it would still produce about more than 500 billion metric tons of CO2 during 2020. This information can be found on the website of the Energy Information Administration. So what does this have to do with electric vehicles? Well, the primary source of producing electricity here in the United States are from these three different types of fossil-fueled power plants. So I will show you right here. So this chart was derived from an article called the U.S. Energy Fact Sheet, published by the Center of Sustainability System from the University of Michigan. As you can see, natural gas power plants produce 32.1% of the total amount of electricity here in the United States, while petroleum power plants produced 36.7%. See, fortunately, coal is not as common as it was centuries ago, as coal-fired power plants only produced 11.3% of electricity during 2020. However, this nearly matches the amount of electricity produced by renewable sources, which only produce around 11.5%. And thus, if we needed to supply additional demand for electricity, our current power grid would be overwhelmed, and we would need to construct a fossil fuel power plants, as this is currently the most effective way and the quickest way to provide additional electricity. And this is relevant because there is currently a trend of a rising demand for electricity here in the United States. So I will show you. See, this chart was also derived from the Energy Information Administration. It is titled "The U.S. Electricity Generation by Major Energy Sources from 1950 to 2020." As you can see, from 1950 to modern day, There's been a rising trend of producing more electricity each year to meet the demand. And as you can see, in 2020, the United States have produced about 4 trillion kilowatts of electricity. And derived from the same source, the United States had also consumed 3.8 trillion kilowatts of electricity, which leaves 0.2 trillion kilowatts in reserve during 2020, which when you compare that to the amount of electricity consumed, it is not much. And thus, because there is a rising demand of electricity and insufficient supply of electricity to supply the replacement of gasoline-powered vehicles for electric ones, we should hold on to our gasoline vehicles until there is a affordable, reliable, renewable energy source that is sufficient enough to replace all of our fossil fuel power plants. But as of right now, that doesn't exist. So in addition to reserving our gasoline and diesel powered vehicles, we should also vote against any local and state legislation that would replace at least 50% of these vehicles with electric ones in the span of at most 3 decades. However, in 2020, Governor Gavin Newsom had signed an executive order in which all vehicles sold here in California will be electric ones by 2035. See, I believe that this date should be revised to 2050, since this would provide Californians more time to adapt to the changes, such as building more charging stations and constructing more renewable power plants, renewable energy power plants. See, we should also ban the further construction of additional fossil fuel power plants, as this would invoke more pollution into the atmosphere. And the purpose of utilizing these electric vehicles was to reduce the overall global emissions in the first place. See, the limited supply of electricity would force electric car manufacturers to limit the production rate of these cars each year. And the extra time would allow people to adapt to these changes, where in many states would have different experiences when building these additional charging stations or more sources of electricity to supply the demand. As you can see, I may have a negative impression for utilizing electric vehicles, since the eco-friendliness of these vehicles is only as good as the method of producing electricity in the first place. However, I do not oppose utilizing the electric vehicles, as by itself, electric vehicles do produce zero emissions. It is the method of producing electricity as well as the rising demand that are the two largest factors in which utilizing electric vehicles will actually create more pollution in the atmosphere. And thus, we should hold on to our gasoline fueled vehicles and vote against any legislations that does not support it. However, one day we will be driving electric vehicles, as well as having many renewable energy sources erected throughout the United States. Only this would be happening several decades in the future. Thank you.